Everyone loves Disney for different reasons. Some love the movies, classic animated films such as The Lion King, Fox and the Hound. Others grew up alongside rising stars like Hannah Montana, Justin Bieber, imagining themselves as future Disney success stories. For me, however, my heart belongs to the Haunted Mansion. I've probably been a few dozen times to the Magic Kingdom, and every time I go, I've made a beeline to the spooky attraction. Told myself if I ever had my own kids, I would definitely make sure that they grew up with it too. But unfortunately for me, when I became an adult, life hit me hard with debt and work and COVID right as I was in the middle of college. Suddenly, trying to find 2 jobs, juggling a relationship, stay healthy. There just wasn't time for childhood fantasies anymore, and still, my girlfriend's been a big fan of the Haunted Mansion for her whole life too. Only difference is, she never actually went to the amusement park. So I promised Leah that we would go to the mansion as soon as COVID restrictions were lifted, but that didn't happen. Life. I said we'd get around to it, but honestly, things just weren't looking great for that spooky getaway. So, you might imagine that I was quite shocked when one day, Leah announced that she'd discovered a house not far from where we lived that looks, well, almost exactly like the Magic Kingdom's infamous manor. She goes on mile runs with her best friend Sierra at least twice a week on this trail, which goes pretty far back into the woods. It branches in a lot of different directions, and this time, she went as far into the back country as she could before coming across the house. When she told me, I was immediately a bit skeptical. Why is it all the way out there in the middle of nowhere? You sure about what you saw? I said. I hated to be the negative type, but it seemed very odd that something like that would be so close to us. I think I saw it being built a few months back. Just hadn't been back there. Maybe it's sort of like in honor of the real one? It's almost Halloween, so maybe someone made it an attraction. Either way, we should go check it out, Leah told me. I decided to take the bait and went with her the following day to the trail. It wasn't easy to get back to the spot where she found the manor. In fact, I had to admit it was a bit disorienting, the way the woods weaved and twisted. Thankfully, my sense of direction made me feel a little less panicked about being so far from the road. You sure there is anything even out here? I asked, as I kept following the path. I didn't want to be out here too late, and the sun was already beginning to dip down below the trees. As much as I was confident that I could handle getting back to the road in the day, I didn't like the idea of us being lost here at night. Don't be so scared. This is definitely the way, she told me. Just when I was considering giving up, we found it. Now, I have to admit that I was surprised to realize that Leah hadn't been exaggerating about the way the place looked. It was this New Orleans-style manor that resembled the famous Haunted Mansion from Disneyland, almost to an exact replica. Now, I still kept a bit of skepticism for a few reasons. One, because it's been a few years since I had gone, so I wasn't entirely sure if the design was a perfect match to the current manor. And 2, because the place looked even more abandoned than the actual manor from the park. Looks like they were working on it and then just up and left, I said, as I approached the iron fence that encircled the house. There was a pet cemetery with cute names of beloved animals not far from where we stood, and I asked my wife, "You didn't try to go inside, did you?" Leah shrugged and said, "Didn't know if that was trespassing or not." We reached the gate that was open, and I tested it, listening to the creaking metal as I called out to anyone that might be nearby. The woods echoed my words and gave the manor an eerie sense of dread. "I don't see any signs that indicate it's owned by anyone," I said. I was so curious I felt the need to walk down the main stone path to the front door. There were long, dusty cobwebs across the windows, and a few of them even boarded up, giving it that feeling of a genuine haunted house. It really made me feel that whoever had created this place had been more obsessed with the Haunted Mansion than anyone I'd ever known. I reached up for the door knocker, a gargoyle-styled head, and used it to announce our presence. To my surprise, a voice that reminded me of that classic ghost host boomed overhead. "Whoever enters this place is offered a reward for staying a single night. Face your fears and discover the secrets of our home, and you may learn a thing or two about yourself." It sounded old and scratchy, like it had been stolen off a recording, and I turned to my girlfriend and said, "Well, guess we are here. Should we go in?" I tried the door and it opened into a dimly lit, dusty hallway, one that looked like it hadn't been maintained in ages. The old carpet led towards a reception desk, which even had a hotel bell on it with some portraits behind the desk that reminded me of the manor as well. Really outdone themselves with the details of this place, haven't they? Leah grabbed my hand as we looked about the empty room. This place is huge. I don't like it here, she admitted. I also felt a strange chill in the air as I looked at the portraits. Familiar nostalgia of being there as a kid, haunting my memories. Look, whoever made this place is clearly a big fan, as we are. Can't be dangerous. It's all for fun, I told her, as I tapped the bell and heard the ring echo down the hall. Almost immediately, the ghost host monologue started up again. Honored guests, I admit that my initial greetings did not offer you the full truth of the situation. I promised that if you survived the night, untold riches could be yours, but I did not advise of any warnings. The voiceover continued to give the same spiel from the famous ride as I walked down the hall. To where I guess the doom buggies were supposed to be. At first, the room seemed vacant until the voiceover came to an end. Then, from one end of the shadowy corridor, I heard a low clanking noise, and the steel carriages emerged from the dark. That's pretty cool. You get to enjoy the show and not even pay admission, I told Leah. She was still having second thoughts. Maybe we should figure out more about who built it. I think it's mighty creepy, she told me. As the carriages stopped and the bars came up, I offered my hand to her, carefree of what might lay ahead. This is going to be a blast, okay? Trust me. Leah stood there, frightened, but unwilling to move without me. We got on the carriage, and as soon as we were seated, the bars went down. Then, we were slowly propelled into the next shadowy corridor. My memory of the ride itself was faint, but I was excited to see if the builders of this replica did their best to include elements like Madame Leota, the Killer Bride, or perhaps even the Hatbox Ghost. I felt like a kid as gentle lights that were meant to represent spirits danced across our view. Leah clung to me, waiting for something to go wrong. We slowed down as we neared a room that reminded me of a fortune-teller's tent. Immediately, I realized this was meant to be where the infamous Lady Seer Leota would read our fortunes, a grisly reminder of the fate we had taken on entering the manor. Unfortunately, though, the area was empty. Apparently, whoever was running the show hadn't been able to afford any of the animatronic puppets yet. What's that? Leah said as she pointed at something emerging from the table. I recognized the sphere instantly. Crystal ball. Looks authentic, too, made of the finest jewels, I said. Leah pushed the bars of the buggy and it propped open, allowing her to climb over to the table and touch the sphere. A light show glittered through the empty room as she picked it up. Is this the treasure the voiceover spoke about? She asked. It was symbolic. The real ghost house doesn't have anything. And with all the money they poured into the realism of this ride and locations, I doubt it's much more than a prop, I said. She took it and held it up. Maybe. But seeing as this place seems abandoned, I'd be ashamed to leave it, she said. Leah, that's stealing, I whispered as I looked towards the next hall, where there were 2 caskets lined up as if they were meant to be beds. And who's going to be bothered by it? You said it yourself, no one's here, she argued. Just as she finished speaking those words, a skeletal hand launched from behind the curtains and grabbed a hold of her wrist, immediately followed by the face of what looked like a 90-year-old woman, drawn back and hardly even alive anymore, with her eyes swollen shut. Her hair was hardly a few tufts in her head, and her teeth looked like they were made of wood and barbs. This was a gruesome version of the familiar clairvoyant, but the purpose was all the same. Leah screamed and dropped the ball, or rather, Leota snatched it back, and a voice from the overhead speaker in a rhythm to curse us for attempting to steal. You gonna be okay? My girlfriend asked nervously as the doom buggies went to the next room and came to a halt. It was pitch black. I was definitely feeling we should turn around when a shadowy figure appeared amidst the darkness. The only way I could discern what he looked like was because of the velvet coat he wore that draped down to the floor. It shimmered against the shadows as he approached our ride, leaning just close enough for me to see his human eyes. I knew that Leota had clearly been some kind of animatronic, but this individual looked far more human. And not friendly at all. I covered Leah's. We stood there side by side, uncertain of what to say or do as the figure stood up and clapped his hands, illuminating the room. There was a nearby animatronic band that started to play, their ghastly faces a terrible imitation of what was on the ride as they focused on the man in front of us. He was clearly flesh and blood, dressed to impersonate one of the Gracie Manor members, but none of the ones I recognized from my other rides at the manor. "Well then, suppose I have a couple of trespassers on my hands," he said, spinning his skull cane around almost playfully and leaning on it as he pretended to think about what he was going to do to us. "Sir, we apologize. We didn't know if anyone used this place." I stumbled over my words as I held Leah close. She was trembling. The man looked as if he understood, walking around the buggy and leaning back and forth. It was like he was debating if we were going to be punished. "I can't exactly have others know this place is out here. Not yet, anyway. It's not finished. I guess that means you have to join the other spirits that rest here. Possibly for all eternity. Or at least until I figure out what to do with you," he scoffed. He was taking a good long look at my girlfriend and nodded excitedly, mumbling to himself before he cackled, "You just might do." I opened my mouth to make another plea for our safety when I saw that he leaned against a long, thin lever, and suddenly the seats beneath us slid down, or rather, my side did. He lunged for Leah, pulling her from the buggy as I fell into the darkness below. I screamed. I heard Leah do the same as I dropped into a mysterious shaft below the ride. For the longest time, it felt like I was plummeting, and then, at last, I struck the soft bottom. I felt bruised and defeated, confused about where I was, and wondered about Leah. So immediately, I got up and I tried to get a glimpse of my surroundings. It looked like a boiler room or a crematorium, and worst of all, there were lined up coffins that were recently being put together, meant for possibly victims. I realized as I saw the burning embers of an incinerator close by. Was that going to be where I ended up too when this was over? I heard a muffled scream from nearby as I went rather into the tunnel. Immediately I shouted out to Leah, but then realized how foolish that was. She was far above me, taken by the insane master of the manor, I realized. Instead, as I listened, I found myself near to one of the already finished coffins where the muffled noises came from. Someone was inside. Frantically, I began to look around the room for anything that might help break the coffin open. Noticing a few stray tools on the right side of the room, I slammed the sharp end of the hammer into the wood. I hoped to God that whoever was trapped inside was still alive, but by the time I opened the lid and pushed away the splinters of the broken wood, the man that lay within was almost as still as a corpse. Had I been too late? I reached close to check for a pulse when his eyes popped open and he sat up gasping for breath as he toppled out of the wooden cage. I took a step back and waited for him to recover, my mind still racing to consider what had happened to the room above us. So many people were trapped here. "You all right?" I asked once he finally regained his composure. I am now. Dear Lord, thank you so much. I was almost out of air," he said as he looked around the dusty basement. "So this is where I've been trapped, huh? I guess he didn't expect anyone to show up. Thank you so much." I took a moment to look at the stranger. Looked like he had been stripped of most of his clothes, save for his underwear and socks. And his body was covered in powder like he had been attempting to be a ghost. "You work here at this replica?" I guessed. "Built it, actually. Took almost 2 damn years with the help of that idiot upstairs, and this is the thanks I get," he retorted as he wobbled toward the nearby stairwell. "The man upstairs, he worked for you? He's psychotic. He has my girlfriend, Leah. Can we stop him?" The real host nodded and said, "We might stand a chance now that you've rescued me. Come on." As we traveled through the basement into the stone labyrinth, the man gave me a summary of the events of his life for the past 2 years. His name was Christopher. He had come into some money thanks to family right before COVID hit. Having always been a Disney fanatic, he decided to use it towards the renovation of an old manor that would serve as a sort of Midwest haunted mansion. Fortunately, I'm not a young chap, so I sent out advertisements for help, and Tim, the crazy guy who nearly killed you, was his first answer. He worked with the vigor of 10 men. I realized I didn't even need to hire anyone else. Tim, he said, was an even bigger fan of the haunted mansion than he expected. So much so that when I began to make cosmetic changes to the manor, he was infuriated. He insisted I needed to be exact and authentic. I told him that wouldn't be possible. For example, this labyrinth we're traversing now, I couldn't simply toss it out. It was already part of a far larger structure, Chris told me. I was a bit curious to find out what was the original story behind this strange place, but kept quiet as he insisted that he had to focus on finding a way out of the maze. The test is somewhat history. Tim decided to use brute force and lock me down here some time ago. He's been keeping me alive, giving me food and drink. But recently, things changed, and he forced me into that coffin. He realized I was close to escaping and reporting to the authorities. So then you do know a way out? I said hopefully. As long as he hasn't sealed it, I do. To be honest, I'm not sure what his goal here is. The man's a lunatic. Especially when it comes to Disney and this haunted mansion. He even was calling himself Lord Gracie before he attacked me and told me that he'd soon fix the mistakes to my replica and have a full cast for the dreadful ride to fit his needs. I paused as I realized why he had taken Leah. He wants to make my girlfriend a part of this attraction? Sick. I'm sorry that you got roped into this. And now we're going to have to work together to surprise him and stop him before anyone else is hurt. I have a feeling that he wants to transform this place into his own private hell, Chris said as he approached a wall. I hesitated, thinking that we were at a dead end, and then he clapped his hands a series of times, and the stones moved out of the way to reveal a modern elevator. This can take us to the unfinished portions of the replica. You might be able to sneak up on him from there, Chris told me as we got inside. I didn't say a word, frightened by the possibility that the madman who had taken Leah was somewhere close by. I had no idea which parts of the manor he had access to, and despite Chris reassuring me that everything would be fine, I was less than trustful of him either. The sooner I was away from this Disney nightmare, the better, I thought as we crawled through some of the unfinished upper floor. There were rolls of carpet and paint and props that Chris had bought online, meant to evoke some eerie feeling as the real attraction. But none of it mattered to me anymore. Instead, I was focused on the next room where I could hear muffled screams. We need to do this cautiously. Tim is an unhinged maniac. He might think that killing your friend is the only way to permanently make her part of this farce, the former host warned. That only made me more determined to save her. I pushed through the next rickety door and looked down at the bridal suite, hardly believing how quickly the fanatic had changed Leah's appearance. She looked just like the real Black Widow bride. Her normal glow was replaced with pale skin. Her dark auburn hair was now completely blonde, with patches of gray in it, as if he had hastily tossed the splotches of dye on my girlfriend's features. The wedding dress looked like it was bought from a second-hand shop, torn and bloody. Probably even with real human blood, too. And at the moment, the fanatic was trying to push her to the bridal bed and force a hatchet into her hands. You're meant to be my Hatchaway, the original attic ghost. Don't you see how you could use this weapon to murder innocent husbands at whim? This is a role that is meant for you. Leah was fighting back, trying to slam the axe into Tim's face. The only place I want it to go is in your damn skull, she shouted. I looked towards Chris for advice, and he pointed towards a chandelier that swung above the bridal suite. We might be able to use that as a trap, he whispered. We carefully went to the other side of the rafters as the two struggled below, sweating profusely as I tried to get the massive decoration to fall, but nothing helped. Until, at last, the murderous employee lost his focus on Leah and looked above towards where we were. How in the world did you escape that maze? He shouted. Leah used that moment to break free and started to run as the axe flung from her hands and hit the man in the belly. Chris fell into the chandelier to stop him. The man and the decoration tumbled down into the bridal suite as Leah screamed. The massive twist of metal must have broken several bones, and more importantly, it trapped him under it. No, you can't do this, he screamed in agony. As I managed to climb down. Tim, Please listen to me. This has to stop, said Chris as the other man tried to grab his foot. It's Gracie. I am Gracie, the crazed man screamed back. Chris was standing there with the axe, seriously considering ending the man's life. I stopped him. We need to call the cops. Don't stoop to his level of madness. He was broken from his revenge and nodded, only a moment later to realize that his employee was already dead. Massive impact from the chandelier must have fractured his skull. Blood loss is too great. My God, Leah whispered. I held her close and looked towards the host that had created this strange house. I think we'll be going now, I told him. Chris understood our reasons and helped us to the front of the attraction. Now that this is behind me, perhaps I can actually open in earnest when Halloween comes. That was the original plan, anyway. Well, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but given what we just went through, we probably won't be your first customers, I told him. He nodded, sadly, as he clutched the axe near the front door and said, But you did at least think it was almost as authentic as the real thing. Leah gave me a glance and nudged me to placate the poor man. Sure. In my book, it probably would have been 5 stars, I told him. Chris smiled and nodded, stepping back to the front porch. That makes me feel like it was all worth it. Thank you. A moment later, the man faded into the ether. As I saw him disappear, a chill ran up my spine, and I grabbed Leah's hand. The entire replica mansion disappeared as well, revealing just a hollow, aged, decrepit manor that hadn't been touched in generations. We both weren't sure what we had just experienced, but we ran from the woods and didn't look back. Since that time, I've gone by that trail and seen the destroyed manor several times. No indication that it was ever used at all. But I do feel eyes upon me as I pass it. Sinister and benevolent in many ways. It's affected me in a greater way than the real attraction ever will. And I think I've made a decision not to go to the haunted mansion. I don't think I can stomach the idea of becoming just another piece of the lore. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. If you scroll down to the description at the very bottom, you'll find a whole bunch of people there. Also, we've included this nice little scrolling thing because the number of people who support me on Patreon has gotten so big that I'm afraid it might actually max out the description. So we've included this here as the little scrolling text on the end screens. So everybody on that scrolling text, everybody I'm about to mention right now and mispronounce all of your names, and everybody who can donate even $1, thank you so much. A very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Reaper61167, Bobby Karman, Tristain, Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Vicky McQuicky, SamaHigh, CrusaderChocobo, SpookyShel, Atomaurus, Grand Moth the Milky, Big Smoke 369, Captain Scurvy, SaltyIrishPoet, Estebean, Brayden Morris, Nate Kuhl, HorrorFan1212, Hour Minute Second Time, Kyle Resnack, David Martin, Scare-ington the Unkempt, Robert Malcolm, Angela, Spanky, Snoochie Boochie, Seclude, Lupita Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Tyler Fletcher, Merxenum, Red Shadowcat, Xavier the Cheyenne, Demix, Sean Cadieu-baker, 6 Gay Rats in a Trenchcoat, Turtleman, Rob Like Sharp Things, Cryolinian, Xavier Graphius, Lord Life's Best, Goring Tremagacy, Maria Walker, Emily Mitchell, Crazy Kid, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Eka Limchok, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Hidden Tiger, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Psychomel, Nana, Deleted Account, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Sashi Suzaku, Cronut 509, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Benjamin Welverick, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. As always, thank you guys so much, because you guys help me do everything that I do here. You guys help pay authors for stories and commission stories and do everything that I can do to make this channel and make this podcast the best it could possibly be. So thank you all for supporting me here. And as always, everyone, sweet dreams.